Deepak, or is that Deepak for our country rep from Nepal? And Andrea is one of our CP ABE certificants as well, working in the built environment. Welcome, Andrea. I haven't seen your name for a bit.
All right, Tracy, let me know when you see Jose, and then we will get going.
We've got Jose. He's under A.
Oh, I see him now. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. This is our third strategic leadership webinar, part of a series of 4. We have 2 great speakers. My name is Christopher Lee. Just a few housekeeping rules before we get going. We do have closed captioning, so you can make sure you turn that on if you'd like. We also have an ASL interpreter. We have 2, and you can pin those and they're spotlighted. We are having mutes, all the mics just muted. I think that's something important that we learn all the time. So do use the Q&A and the chat if you need to. Your questions should be posted in the Q&A. The webinar is being recorded and it will be posted to our YouTube, IAAP's YouTube channel. And again, keep the chat for general discussions. If you have any technical issues, we do have Tracy and myself that will be behind the scenes and we can help you out if needed. So just a little bit about IAAP before we jump into the presentation. We're part of G3 ICT, the Global Initiative for Inclusive ICT, which is located in the States, but it's international. That's part of the United Nations. We work on the CRPD, and IAAP is a division of G3 ICT. You can become a member. There's a membership link right there. You can just Google IAAP and you also pull that up too. We focus on accessibility certification, professional development, and networking. You can sign up for our newsletter if you go to our website, and you can get our monthly newsletters, our weekly updates. We have with us today 2 incredible speakers, which I happen to know. Neil Eustace, who's the Diversity and Knowledge Manager at KPMG for their IT department. He's also involved with their content management internally regarding accessibility. We also have Jodie Greer, who's Managing Director at Be People Smart. Before that, she was at Shell. Her work is focused on diversity and inclusion. So both Neil and Jodie, welcome. We are so glad to have you here today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Christopher, and thank you to Neil. So some of you may have seen, we were actually going to have Subhash joining us this morning. So unfortunately, he couldn't make it, but as sad as I am about that, because it would have been great to chat to him, the fabulous Mr. Neil Eustace is certainly one of my favourite people to talk to, certainly when it comes to accessibility. So thanks ever so much, Neil.
Thank you.
So one of the key domains in our body of knowledge for strategic leader in accessibility, our SLIA, is of course, which I say of course, but it seems obvious, accessibility expertise. You know, to really influence, you need to know your stuff. So we talk about this and we talk about it a lot. I guess it's just important, quite literally, that you do know your subject matter. So Neil, what are your thoughts on that and how we sort of capture it in our body of knowledge?
Well, it does appear that there's a lack of accreditations across the globe in relation to this topic. And that's one area where the IAAP really step up to enable development and competency assurance. If you see that someone has, say, a CPAC or WAS or ABE accreditation, or what we're currently working on, the strategic leader in accessibility, then at least you know they've got proven knowledge that's been tested and certified to a recognised standard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's about obviously people being able to develop, because it gives them sort of opportunities to understand where to sort of go and what knowledge to broaden. But it's also, it is proven competency, right, for those of us that are already leaders in this space. So it's really nice to be able to demonstrate for yourself and for your stakeholders that you are an SLIA. So I think that would be, you know, a brilliant addition to the different accreditations that we see in the IAAP.
Yeah, and unlike the other accreditations that we've looked at previously in IAP, this is quite a broad ranging topic. The SLRA, the strategic leader in accessibility, has to not just have knowledge of the technical IT workings of things, but also the build side of things. So how accessible are your buildings and things like that, and a bit of people knowledge as well around HR legislation maybe. You've got to be able to influence a lot of people to make sure that your business is truly accessible, because you can't have one without the other really. It's no good having a great team of accessibility experts in IT if the rest of the business is ignoring accessibility. Your business just won't cut it. So it's got to happen right across the board.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think for me, one of the really nice things about chairing the task force for the SLIA is the sort of quite wide range and the holistic knowledge of accessibility that we've got within the team. And I think the community of practice calls we've had already and the interaction we've had from other accessibility professionals has been quite powerful. You know, we've learned a lot from people, and it's enabling us to therefore put that forward as part of the body of knowledge. So obviously we're planning the certification. I absolutely hope to see it all go live, and that this is going to really sort of traction people's development. But also we need to be practical about this. You know, that there's a reason behind needing accessibility. Of course, there's people, but there's also legal obligation. So why would you say, Neil, companies should really be concerned about making sure they're actually meeting accessibility requirements?
Well, so there's so many countries around the world at the moment that are making it clear that discrimination against disabled persons is not only wrong, but illegal in their jurisdiction. So across Europe, they've mandated on the requirements for public procurement of products and services. The UK have the Equality Act and the public sector bodies accessibility regulations. You've got the US with Section 508. Australia, the Disability Discrimination Act and the National Strategy for Web Accessibility. Canada, their government have web standards, and within Canada itself, Ontario's got the Accessibility of Ontarians. Right across the world, there are legislations coming out. The point is that there are over 40 legislations and growing around the world, but it's not just the fear of legal disputes that should be driving your business to act on this topic. If you just concentrate on meeting the legal requirements, then you might be in a position where you just do the legal minimum to safeguard yourself from lawsuits, but your reputation can be tarnished and even trashed without ever going anywhere near a court case. When it comes to the level of accessibility you should apply to your business, well, our colleague Subhash put it rather nicely recently. He said, would you rather your child passed a test or passed with distinction? Why would you want less for your business, your staff, or your customers? I thought that was nice.
I really, really like that point actually that you made. And I think this is kind of the point as well. You know, sometimes what's seen as good enough, it really doesn't add value. You know, it's important that we've not got tick box exercises as well. So, you know, some additional planning, it can really set you up for long-term success as well, because of course, the world changes, your staff change, people's individual needs change. It is just so important that you don't lose talent, but you also, of course, don't lose productivity. But legislation aside, it's really about doing the right thing, isn't it? You know, it is, I mean, be people smart, but it is about putting a bit of human centricity back into the workplace.
Yeah, I like that human centricity angle. So I like the idea that people are at the centre of all of this. I know that you were going to talk about the difference between, say, universal design and reasonable adjustments. It's not just technical side of things you need to look at, it's what's what's best for people. Organisations often attempt to make accommodations, however, that often fall short of meeting the requirements and enabling people to complete their roles, or use products or services. For example, accessible toilets actually meet the needs of many employees. Accessibility isn't just a one-time affair, it's an ongoing process which has to be maintained for its lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And one of my new favourite sayings, which I actually borrowed, I won't say stole, from someone at a recent event, was it's about having enabled staff and customers. It's not about disabled staff and customers. It's enabling everybody. And I think that's actually a really nice way of looking at it, because of course that's good for your people and it's certainly good for your business. But yeah, you referenced the whole universal design versus accessibility adjustments or accommodations. And yeah, it's something I'm really keen to talk about, because for me, absolutely reasonable accommodations, I mean, we can get a bit fixed on the word reasonable, to be honest. So accessibility accommodations or adjustments for individuals are absolutely, you know, they're essential. We're all different, you know, people have different ways of working and preferences and things, and we need to make sure people can do what they need to do. But also universal design is really important, that proactive focus to enable everyone in the first place can actually make life just so much easier for literally everyone about. And then for those who still need an adjustment or an accommodation, that, you know, that comes thereafter. And I think sometimes what I don't see so much, obviously there's building regulations, but when it comes to both the physical workplace, so the built environment, and also the digital workplace, the proactive thing can be a bit lacking sometimes. And I think for me, that's somewhere I'd love to see a lot more attention put. So I think it's not, you know, it's not just about good practice. And I think the other thing as well, we often see a bit of hesitance around making accommodations and adjustments, but actually so often they're free, they're low cost, but ultimately the productivity of someone who's enabled is kind of priceless. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, you're right. There's an awful lot of stuff that's free now. Accommodations are built in to a lot of products that we use now, and suppliers and manufacturers are getting better and better at building stuff in so that you can make changes for individuals. But also, you say about, you know, making somebody enabled and giving them the adjustments that they need makes them more worthwhile to the business. They get the business done. If you give a level playing field across the board, then everyone's got an equal chance of performing their job role, their task. So to get the most out of somebody, you need to give them what they need to do the job of work. And whether that's assistive technology in the form of additional software or hardware, or whether it's just putting some rules and processes in place to help them, makes them A, more productive, but B, more loyal to you as well. They tend to, if they feel comfortable that they've got the adjustments that they need, then they tend to fit in better, they stay longer. You just get more out of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes we don't even realise that most, if not all of us, have an adjustment. You know, I choose to use a one-ear cordless headset because it works better for me. I can get up and move around if I choose and so on. Yours is different to mine. But even irrespective of any, you know, a disability, impairment, or, you know, a specific need, this works better for me and I feel I work better with certain equipment.
Yeah, and it really is a case of supplying what works for the individuals. It's not a case of, well, there's lots of things that can do this for somebody, let's choose one because it's more cost effective. And I've seen a lot of people trying to do that. You can't have one size fits all, especially when it comes to accessibility. because let's face it, every disability is unique to the individual, and everyone shows that or reacts to their disability in a different way and needs a slightly different adjustment to somebody who might have what in medical terms is the same disability. So you've got to be flexible, and you've got to be able to provide what they need for them to do the job of work. But it doesn't have to cost the earth. And if you plan things properly, and if you have the right partners in place, then and get the right knowledge within your business, then you can find out that actually adjustments is just a simple process at really a low cost, and you get more for your money if you plan these things, because you get more out of your people by making sure the adjustments are properly in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, a big thing with that, again, going back to the kind of design versus accommodations piece, is if you actually design with accessibility in mind, it's actually a cost saver often, because you don't pay for retrofits, you don't pay for alternatives as well as, because it didn't actually meet all the needs. You have a solution that works for everyone. So I think sometimes people fall short of recognizing that, because everyone gets so busy with their projects and things. But yeah, with a bit of knowledge and a bit of foresight, you get a superior product or a superior service that actually works for your employees and your customers. And, did it actually cost any more, or is it actually also a cost saving? But also then you get that ongoing, the retention, also attracting new talent, because they can recognize that actually you are inclusive.
Yeah, everyone who works in technology knows that it's a lot more expensive to build in accessibility as an afterthought. If you'd only done it at the beginning, it would have saved you a huge amount of time and money. So it's just not sensible to not think about accessibility when you're designing something right from the offset.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why we've been talking quite a lot when we've been looking at the body of knowledge for the SLIA, around the fact that, of course, to actually be a strategic lead in accessibility, really you need to take that kind of, whether it be ownership, but it's certainly that overarching ownership and the kind of monitoring of the design and implementation of an accommodations or, adjustment process for your organisation. Because, there needs to be a proper end-to-end process. It can't just kind of be a written document. It's got to work. And that really is what's going to drive sort of individual success, but certainly business success.
Yeah, that's the internal collaboration piece, isn't it? Making sure that you've joined up all the dots, that every person in your business understands what accessibility is about. They don't have to be a technical person. They don't have to be a legal expert. They just need to understand, look, this is what accessibility means to individuals. This is why we do it. And this is how you can play your part. Irrespective of what your role is in the business, everyone has a role to play in making our business accessible. So you need to make sure that communication channel goes right across the board.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, that you talk about sort of the partnering piece, and that's another one of our domains in the body of knowledge. But, that partnering, it's obviously internal. There's so many teams that need to be embraced to make sure that everybody can play their part and everybody understands what that looks like and what's expected and what's needed from them. But also they've got the knowledge needed. But then you've got your external partners. So you have suppliers, you've got agencies and consultants you work with. And often, especially in larger organizations, there's so many different agencies that may be doing, segments for different areas of the organization. It can be quite difficult to make sure you're reaching everyone. And so that needs to be part of that kind of strategic plan, doesn't it? To make sure that you've got a method to actually reach out to everyone. And maybe that's through your contracts and procurement team. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you need to have an overarching plan for the whole business that says all of these teams have input into the accessibility of our business. So if we're buying something, we need to make sure that what we buy is accessible to the people who are going to use it. So we need to make sure the procurement team have their processes and their policies in place, but also have that understanding from an individual level as to why they're having these conversations and how they can talk to the people that they're buying stuff from. The HR people need to understand accessibility and how the well-being of our people is affected, right down to every individual on the shop floor, be it the receptionists at the front door. They need to understand, well, how do I greet people with different disabilities? What have I got that information to hand? Have I been trained in how to do this? Because I'm the face of the business. So everyone needs to understand accessibility, including your suppliers, and why you're doing it. And it's good to have an accessibility statement that you can show and show off to say, look, we are doing what we can to be as accessible as possible, and ask for feedback as well.
I really like that, the show off bit, because for me, it really is something to celebrate. You know, you're inclusive, you actually care about the people that are coming to your business. I mean, in whatever guise they're coming in, the fact that you care, surely that's a win right from the off, especially from people's interpretation and their, you know, first impressions and things.
Yeah, and it mustn't just be a merit badge that you wear and show off if there's no action behind it. It's no good having something stamped on your external website to prove it's accessible if as soon as they get to talk to somebody, suddenly they find that the rest of the accessibility of your business falls over. So you've got to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. So.
Yeah, definitely. I was actually just checking on the Q&A, but I noticed there are some comments in the chat. So a couple of things good to pick up on. So we were talking about sort of retrofitting, etc. And someone said, with absolutely, even more expensive in the built environment if accessibility is not addressed in design. Moving stairs or elevators is certainly expensive, more so than adjusting colour contrast. Absolutely, you know. I was in property for like 2 decades, and retrofitting is never ever the preferred method. So yeah, thank you for that. Someone else has asked a really interesting question, more about not the world of adults. So any good practice or thought regarding teaching children in school about accessibility and universal design? Studying for grade 5 or 6, I might need someone in the US to tell me the age of grade 5 or 6.
That's a really good one, because the schools, I can only speak from a UK education point, but the schools in the UK are a lot more accommodating now than they ever were to children with disabilities, and you'll find that there's teachers' assistants in now to make sure that we can keep children in the standard education streams without them having to go to special schools as much as possible, so that integration's there, and that children without disabilities mix with children with disabilities, and that it's seen as just normal. That's the way of the world. We are all in the same boat together. So classrooms have to become more accessible to kids who use walking frames and things like that. Teachers need to understand accessibility, because they're talking to children who have cochlear implants or who maybe need a little extra help sitting near the front because of visual disabilities, all sorts of things. So it's becoming a lot more common now. And I think the big secret is really just talk about it more. A bit like you talk about your kids about internet security now, when they're all on their phones and doing TikTok and all the rest of it. You wouldn't not talk to your kids about staying safe online. And I think we should do the same when it comes to disability and accessibility. Talk to kids about it and say, look, there's so many different people in the world, and we need to accommodate all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the integration's fantastic. I do, however, feel, even in the UK as well, that it is important that we have more real explicit focus on disability inclusion and on accessibility. Because I think that's part of the thing. We almost now get a little bit complacent that there's integration and therefore it's kind of sorted, it's done. And I think there needs to be more active discussion on these things. And it's interesting because I can't actually say, Deepak, who raised the point about educating children. So Deepak said, the adult mind's hardly ready to change. So what about children? And I think it's easier to get into children because, of course, their minds are so open and they're always learning. We're all always learning, but of course, that's literally what they're at school for. But I think it'd be fantastic to have a proper intention in schools to get people to understand what accessibility is. Because when you leave education and go into the workplace for the first time, for instance, of course, you want to prove yourself, you want to demonstrate how good you are, and you want to show that you were the best choice and all those kind of things. You've got an awful lot going on. And then you've also got some of these extracurricular stuff being sort of thrown towards you, like, do you want to get involved in networks? We've got 12, which one do you fancy? You could do them all. And you've got to really try and, find this balance. And then someone's telling you, we also need you to know about accessibility and things. And don't get me wrong, of course it can start in the workplace. We've done it lots of times and it is certainly making a massive change in the world. But it's kind of too late. If people grow up understanding what it really looks like, understanding how to make it happen, and the fact it's normality, it's just part of life day to day, then that's amazing, because that's where you see proper cultural shift. And it just becomes business as usual. And you stop needing, a lot of this networking stuff that's dedicated, because it's just standard practice. So I'd love to see it in schools, I guess is what I'm saying. And I've actually had some conversations myself with some teachers in the UK about, channeling it in. But yeah, if you do see this happen in other countries, share it on social media and tag me, please, because I'd love to see more about what we do. Someone's told me grade 5 to 6 is the same as years 5 to 6 in the UK. Person with no children, I think that's like 10 years old, I think.
Jodie, somebody posted in the Q&A that it's 11, 12.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so no kids. Right. So yeah, just some of these points and questions that are coming in are pretty good. So I just want to make sure we don't miss anything. So certain devices that, I'm not sure what that is, certain devices that something require a patented. Oh, sorry, it's because it wasn't capitals. I'm being a bit daft. Certain devices that PWD require are patented, which prevents at times mass production, making it expensive. Open hardware and open source must be looked into. Yeah, yeah.
Well, there's a lot of open source stuff when it comes to software around accessibility, things like various fonts. I mean, you've got like the Open Dyslexic font and things like that, and they're sharing a lot of information now, and it's a lot easier to find, I think, open source stuff with software. Hardware, I don't know about, but I think that certainly there's a lot of competition opening up when it comes to hardware, because you'll see that somebody comes up with a bright idea. I saw something recently where somebody had invented a glove where somebody could sign with a electronic glove on, and it would translate it onto a screen. So, and then other people say, oh, that's a good idea, we could do something like that, and it starts to spread, and of course as it spreads it gets cheaper. But these things always take time. But I think the more that it becomes mainstream for accessibility and disability to be spoken about in every walk of life, then the more people start saying, there's business here, I can build something to help with this, and you get a lot of entrepreneurs actually trying to improve things as well, and build something that's cheaper or even free sometimes. But it takes time.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, I still find it frustrating sometimes that the market is so slow to catch up with the real world. But you know, there's movement. But yeah, definitely, we do need to see more in the hardware space. There needs to be a lot more leverage, because it shouldn't be difficult and it shouldn't be more costly, because people have felt like they've got some sort of niche market. There's another question actually, but this is from Christopher, and specifically about the SLIA. So talking about a strategic leader in accessibility, where should they be placed in an organisation? And we've had a lot of talk about this on the task force, haven't we?
Yeah.
And for me, my view is it really depends on the size of an organisation, the structure. So for instance, if you're in quite a small or medium-sized company, it may well be that it's one of the directors. It may well be your HR lead. It may be very different. But in a large organisation, I would love to see all large organisations with a dedicated accessibility lead, or potentially that could also be your diversity and inclusion lead, because of course the two certainly have clear synergies. What are your thoughts on that, Neil? Because we've talked about this a lot.
Yeah, and there was a lot of conversation about, does it have to be somebody in the C-suite? You know, does it have to be a partner or director of a business that takes on this role? And I think we decided that it needs to be somebody who has the ability to influence. And so at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what grade they are, what position they have in the company as far as partner, director, manager, whatever, so long as they have the ability to influence the people that make the decisions. So it's choosing the right person for the job in the right position. And often, as you say, that does depend on the size of the business. But the important thing about a strategic leader in accessibility is they have to make sure that they can influence all the different component parts of your business, the HR, the facilities, the IT people, the top of the tree that have the finance in their pockets. That, you know, they have to be able to talk to all of these people in their own language and get them to understand why these things need to be done, and get them to develop a plan for getting these things done. So I don't think at the end of the day you should get too hung up about what grade or position in the company should they be. More a case of, is this the right person for the job? Have they got the knowledge, and have they got the personality to get into all the different parts of our business and talk to people?
Yeah, definitely. And of course, influence is really key. But it's interesting, you know, you mentioned finance and we're talking about influence. I'll just quickly mention Martin's comment about the open sourcing, just because it's on the Q&A, and I think it is a good point. So open sourcing could be tricky to implement in bigger companies, because big companies like to have responsible contact in case something doesn't work. So that is true when it comes to, you know, making sure you've actually got clear route of communication. However, sometimes, of course, it's also about what they've been used to working, ways of working, and sometimes there can be changes that's a bit scary, but ultimately could still prove beneficial. But thank you, Martin, that's actually a really good point. But you did mention finance, Neil, and I wanted to come to that, because another thing, and it's a bit of a term I use, is the unconverted. So of course we have lots and lots of different people, especially leaders in different companies, who may not be so people-centric. However, those people are usually commercially centric. And, you know, dollars and cents certainly ring a bell. So I'd like to just get your views as well on, so thinking not just, of course, I mean, legislation can have a financial impact, but not just from a legislative perspective, but, you know, when we're looking at the bottom line, when it comes to the commercial impact, what would, you know, why would you influence organisations, those unconverted, as I say, to, you know, make the change and make sure they are being inclusive and they are accessible?
Yeah, so we can't forget about the commercial impacts. Accessibility is an economic driver at an organisation level only. It's also a driver at a global economy level. People with accessibility needs often don't visit countries purely because they don't see them as accessible. Not only tourism, but also medical tourism. There's money that could come into the country if it was more accessible. However, of course, organisations also benefit directly from being accessible. Employee retention, we mentioned it slightly earlier, but employee retention, you save a fortune in inductions and training costs if you can retain your staff. And lots of studies have shown that employees with disabilities tend to be more loyal to a company, providing their needs are met. Disabled customers are more likely to come through your door if they don't experience barriers. Anyone who produces technology, websites, apps and applications will tell you that it's much more expensive to fix something retrospectively, as we've said before, than it is to build it accessibly in the first instance. So there's lots of financial aspects to this. And again, the guy who stands or the person who stands in for the SLIA in your business would be able to talk to all of these different areas of your business, explaining the economic impact that accessibility or a lack of can have on that particular area of the business, either as a whole or as a component part of the business, because it does affect everything.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And I do honestly feel that when it comes to influencing, you do need to kind of use both tools in a sense. You've got the people impact, which is my real love. And I just think that should do itself. But people love a statistic and everybody wants to know what the bottom line is. So for me, definitely also making sure that when it comes to that influential message, you get it down to the fact that, it is literally a financial win.
So also, we've got to think about how organisations can implement these effective ways of working to meet these accessibility objectives. So what do you think that a business needs to put in place to make sure that they do meet the objectives of being an accessible business?
Yeah, so obviously you've got to start somewhere, and all the organisations are at different point in this journey. But for me, you need really clear and robust standards. But I'm not talking about having a really pretty document that's on your intranet somewhere. That's good, make it pretty, as long as it's accessible. But I think for me, it's that end-to-end piece. It's so important. I mentioned earlier about not having tick box exercises. And that is just essential. If you have a true intent to be inclusive and to enable your staff and customers, that whole piece needs to start with your strategic plan. You need to have those kind of standards and policies in place for enabling the implementation of that. But it needs to be clearly and explicitly communicated, because often these things are a bit hidden. If you know where to find it, you can source the info yourself. But also about learning. So it's not just about saying, please do this is essential and we need this new way of working. What does that actually mean, and how will I know I'm getting it right? And where's my source of information? Where's my champion? Where do I go for some support? It's that whole structural piece. Of course, you got to get there, right? You got to start, but that's why the strategic plan for me is so important, so that you do understand how you're going to get to your end goal. But then it goes way beyond into the point of measuring your success, which can be tricky with accessibility, because you've kind of, you're winning and you've done your design and you've done your testing, for instance, if it's digital. But it's also about feedback. But it's not just about waiting for feedback and seeing, and if you don't get none, then it must be good news. It's about actively seeking that feedback, demonstrating your care for people. So it really is important that it's end to end. That for me is the biggest thing. It has to be a proper, and it has to be evergreen. It doesn't kind of happen today and you complete it at the end of April and then you're done and no one needs to look at it again. That's why someone has to have ownership, because how do you keep it fresh and in line with the world today, tomorrow, and so on?
Yeah.
What about your thoughts?
Well, communication is so very important when it comes to this education piece, and continued communication. So providing awareness, education and training on how to apply accessibility requirements or the policies for the digital and built environments and the people interactions is really essential. And you've got to try and get all the people to bite this apple. You've got to show it to them in such a way that interests them. So depending on the role of the individual in the business, they might need to understand different aspects of accessibility and why they need to do something. But you can't just point them at a piece of training and say, there you go, do that tick box, as you say. You need to understand they've done it. You need to see that they've done it in some way. You need them to evidence that they've done it. But the best way to evidence that they've done it is, well, are we improving? You know, have we got a matrix that we're filling in where we can say, well, when it comes to this part of our business, where were we before and where are we now? Have we improved in our accessibility in this area? Do our people understand what we're doing and how we're doing it? And have they improved in their knowledge of accessibility as far as their role is concerned? So you really need to keep communicating, two-way communication. You need to be getting that feedback, as you said, from people internally in your business, making sure that all the signposts are there as to what they need to do, how they need to do it, and when they need to do it by. But also the feedback from your customers, so important. Not just, oh, well, you know, email us and we might do something about it, but email us and we'll contact you and we will show that we've acted upon it and that we have done something about your feedback. And show off your feedback. You know, if somebody's left your feedback on a website, show that feedback and show what you've done about it so you can show action.
Yeah, I think the kind of, you know, you said we did type messages are really, really important because they do show real care. It's not, you know, it's not to be embarrassed that you weren't perfect in the first instance, but improvement is improvement. Care is care. And I think that's the thing. A lot of organizations can be really hesitant to admit any kind of improvement space, as in, you know, they wasn't wonderful yesterday. And I think just because you do need to improve doesn't mean you wasn't wonderful. You probably was in an awful lot of ways, but there was a gap and there were challenges for someone. But as soon as you was aware, you listened. And as soon as practicably possible, you know, you made a change. That's huge. I mean, that's progress, right? That's what we really need to see.
Yeah, loads of businesses are doing really good stuff. But if you ask them to demonstrate it, to prove what they've done, sometimes they find that a bit difficult because it's just, oh, but we've just done stuff. Well, if you have a proper plan and you have a proper matrix of where are we, where are we going, you know,
Yeah.
where are we heading for, then it's easier to prove. I mean, we have an exercise in the Business Disability Forum in the UK where everyone fills in a matrix every year to say, a maturity model to say, this is where we are, this is where we're heading for. And we found very early on that if everybody's absolutely honest about this, then, and we all were honest about our scores, I said, actually, you know what, we're really not very good on that bit. And I think we're pretty low on that bit. And then more people stepped up and said, well, actually, yeah, us too. And then we found there was a common theme, and that you don't get anyone who's absolutely brilliant and expert in every single aspect of accessibility in your business. It's something that's moving all the time. It's like a slow moving escalator. But so long as you are moving, so long as you're going up, that's great. That's where you want to be. And sharing information with each other is often a great way to learn.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And of course, the biggest learning point are the people. So that feedback metric, but also having somewhere, you know, not necessarily feedback on existing services or solutions, but having somewhere to actively seek those kind of improvement points. I think that's also really important. So it's not hidden, and you are, you're proactive with engaging people. I think that's also really important. I just wanted to capture a couple of the points shared, which takes us back a couple of steps, but just because they're really nice and anyone who hasn't had chance to read them. So we talked about, of course, engaging children, and Andrew shared that his 7-year-old son absolutely loves it, walking around, understanding why there's ramps and dropped curbs and tactile paving and things. Yeah, I think inquisitive kids can be one of the best to influence. So that's great stuff. And I can see an accessibility leader in the future. So that's really good. And then we had a couple of points as well in the Q&A, one a statement and a question, but Nilesh shared that open source is being adopted by all major corporations. Microsoft is one of the biggest funding organizations. Open source, open hardware, open design are easy to maintain and transparent, as everything is open to see to all. I think that's great. It's great to see it's happening. And I think there's stuff that can be learned from organization to organization, and maybe that's also where there could also be a real benefit, is for a bit more transparency on that stuff, so that there's a bit more competition in the market and organizations can see the benefit for them, but also some of the simplicity in actually achieving it. So thank you for that, Nilesh. And Tabitha asked a question. I see many businesses struggling due to COVID and the economy. As a disability inclusion specialist, I find the biggest barrier is being heard. The business case is helpful, but without effective tried true metrics, the message of accessibility is muted. What effective metrics can you share with us that measure disability and inclusion?
We've mentioned maturity models earlier, didn't we? I mean, that's a really good way to measure the accessibility of your business. And there are many maturity models across the world. Some of them are specific just to the IT side of business. Some of them are more wide-reaching. But a maturity model lays out, well, these are the areas that you should be covering. These are the levels that we think you can progress through, and you tick off where you think you are, where you want to be, and then work toward it. And there's many different charities and businesses that are offering maturity models across the world. So it's worth having a look for those.
I completely agree. I think I said earlier it can be quite difficult to measure inclusion and accessibility. So for me, maturity models are definitely a massive tool in my toolkit, because, when they're external as well, see, obviously you can create your own, but when they're external, it defines, say it's 1 through 5, it defines what a 1 is versus a 2 and so on. You can agree within your organization where your targets are for those set points. And because there's a definition against them, it kind of demonstrates that, do you really want to be a 1? It kind of says we haven't really done much. So you don't. So if you've agreed in advance as part of your plan that you want to get to a 3 here, you want to get to a 4 here, you're happy this year with a 2 in this space, then that's great, because you can see where you are, you can see where you want to get to, and then it enables you to set a plan to progress to your objective. And I think that is one of the biggest things, because then you can demonstrate achievement, what you've actually tangibly achieved, where you are now, did you get to where you wanted to be? And of course, are there any challenges? And so for me, I find, those kind of quarterly reviews of maturity models to understand, are we on track? Where are the blockers? Where do I need some help to remove those blockers? Because we've agreed these targets can certainly be a big lever to being able to demonstrate, and to get where you need to be. Anything else on that, Neil? For me, they're the biggest achievement.
Yeah, I think that kind of covered what I was thinking as well. I mean, there's some, as I said, there's some really good maturity models out there that cover absolutely every aspect of a business. So they are worth looking. But the important thing about all of this is being honest with yourself, being honest within your business as to where you really are. Not, oh well, what what would look good for the customer to read, but where are we really? Because if you're not honest with your maturity models and your marking of yourself, then you're never really going to improve very much, because if you're lying to yourself, you'll get caught out eventually. You know, you need to understand exactly where you are, because that will then help you find out, how do I progress? How do I get better? What do I need? And there's a lot of help out there around the world in how you can improve the accessibility of your business. A lot of it free, some of it paid for, but there's getting the right expertise, which is where we kind of started all of this, is really important. So having people who are qualified in being able to talk about this in your business and can walk the walk is very important. So you need to get the right skill sets in place to be able to progress, whether you hire them internally or whether you outsource it to a company who specialize in that particular aspect of accessibility testing or whatever it is you want to check. But you need to make sure that you've got those skill sets in place. And that can take time to work out, well, where we're lacking these particular skills in each part of our business.
Yeah, definitely. Knowledge is so important, and it kind of brings us full circle, because, you know, we started this conversation talking about legislation, and it's also important that organisations are educated as to the legislation in the all the companies they operate in, sorry, all the countries they operate in even, because of course, you know, they do have an obligation. But yeah, for me, it's people first, but that education piece is absolutely key. So I do want to make sure we give the IAAP a couple of minutes for closeout. However, I just want to make sure that we've also covered any comments. We had a nice comment from Laura that she liked the slow moving escalator analogy. So I like that one. I like to steal other people, so I might steal yours now, Neil.
So long as you're moving and you're moving in the right direction, don't worry about the speed that you're moving, so long as you're moving forward.
Actually, there's another one about, can you talk about having to get executive leadership on board? Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about influence, and that's what's really, really key. You know, you've got to be able to influence. But there's two things to that. So you do need to have a conduit, a direct conduit into your exec team, however that's framed in your own structure. So that is absolutely essential. And again, it can't be lip service. It needs to be genuine. So there needs to be proper kind of action from it. But actually, the larger the organizations get, you also need to have a proper inroad to that kind of middle management level, because often there can be real intent at the top, which is great, and there can be really powerful messages rolled out, which is fantastic. And it gets so far, and it doesn't quite hit the top of that agenda. And that, for me, can be a massive barrier. So absolutely, getting into the executive, into the leadership levels is essential, because if you need to change it at an organizational level, really what you want to change as well is your culture. You want to broaden the fact that, you know, it's essential, it's part of business, and it's part of success. But absolutely, you need to get, you know, next couple of levels down as well, is what I would say. What's your findings, Neil?
Yeah. Excuse me. You've got slightly different messages. So from the board, who control the finances and the processes and policies of the whole business, it's the financially sensible thing to do to be accessible, but also it's the right thing to do from a human perspective and a well-being perspective. But then when it comes down to the middle management layer, who are going to action these things, well, it's now policy, it's what we should do. How are you doing it? Here's the help that you need, and let's measure how we're doing. So yeah, you need the statements to come down from on high, but you need the action to make sure it's being performed and that it's being measured and that it's working.
Definitely. Question from Emma. We did talk a bit about structure earlier, but Emma's asking, what structure would you recommend for dedicated accessibility professionals in a large company? And again, I think this really depends, because if you've got a really large company, you may have a group of accessibility professionals who, you know, one's for digital, one's for built. You may have an overarching D&I lead, for instance. So it can really depend. You may find that if you've got a holistic accessibility leader, they may sit in HR because of the kind of human element to it. But it can really, really depend on the way that your organisation works and what works best for you, because at the end of the day, the ultimate intent is to actually make this true and make this kind of business as usual. What about you, Neil? Anything to add to that one?
No, I'd agree with everything you said there, and I've just realised that we're getting close to the hour, so we probably need to hand over to Christopher.
So I just wanted to first of all say thank you to Neil, because as I mentioned, we did have a change of speaker, and to be honest, it's just been really nice chatting to you. I feel like everyone's in our little coffee morning. But also a massive thank you to the IAAP, because I know it's an IAAP webinar, but the two people that have joined us this morning are in the US, mega early. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you, because we were so keen to be inclusive and make sure we're covering different time zones. But Christopher, Tracy, I'll hand over to you now, Christopher, but just thank you very much.
Yeah, Jodie, Neil, thank you so much. Really interesting, fascinating discussion. Lots of points I took, you know, just to summarize, building accessibility up front. Accessibility can attract new talent. Have a disability statement. Neil, that was a very good point. We can learn from education, possibly. Maybe we need to bring that into the mix a little bit more from a corporation standpoint. Placement of strategic leadership depends on the size of the country. Not country, actually company, sorry. Need more coffee. But needs to influence HR, procurement, IT, this person, and finance. So it's important that it's somebody that can you know, speak across the company itself. Tourism, there's some comments around tourism that were brought into it. Smart accessibility business. You know, Jodie said, talked a little bit about, you know, making sure that the standards are robust, making sure that they're clear and they can be found, which I think is very important, as well as making sure that they're part of the life cycle, which I think is also an important point. Customer feedback, making sure that's transparent was brought into it. Talked a little bit about maturity models in the sense that there's a lot of them out there. That may be something that IAAP in the future wants to cover. And just, you know, overall, it was just fascinating. A lot of good points that I grabbed from it. So thank you both. We do have our next webinar scheduled for February 4th on resource engagement. So please join us on that. Before we end, I do want to thank the speakers again. I want to thank my staff member, Tracy Shipman, for all the work that she's done. I want to also thank the captionists that we have, as well as Beth and Jose, the ASL interpreters. Y'all, thank you so much. Great conversation, and have a good rest of the day.
Thanks
everyone. Take care.